My name is Saam. I work for Veterans Treatment Court. So I grew up here in the Midwest. I was actually born outside of Peoria and then up in the suburbs by Barrington. Went to school at Northern Illinois University, and after I completed my undergrad, I got in the U.S. Army infantry. Spent a couple of years doing that and then switched over to Special Forces. And I did three combat deployments to Afghanistan. The first one was in 2001 to 2003. And then in 2005 and again in 2008. So I've been all over Afghanistan. Never went to Iraq, but spent a lot of time over there in Afghanistan at the early part of the war. I've also got a master's degree from Northern Illinois University, and so now I currently work with veterans that are involved with the justice system and just trying to engage with a lot of different organizations here that deal with like substance use, recovery, mental health issues, things like that a lot of veterans struggle with, and not just veterans, but a lot of other people too. You do have support, but it's definitely different than I think on the civilian side of it. So you start off at about 18 years old, you're leaving your family, and you're kind of losing that support. You go into a military environment, and you reform bonds with the other military members around you. And then as you're in the military, every couple years they're changing your location, so you're constantly fracturing your support system and rebuilding it again and again and again. So a lot of veterans have the ability to quickly make friends, but they don't necessarily have deep support structures out there. I moved about 14 times in the first 12 years I was in the military, so it's constant change. Yeah, there's a lot of good things out there. Certainly, probably one of the best is the Montgomery GI Bill and stuff like that. So, signing up for the military and then getting the education benefits. So, the military helped pay for my undergrad. It's paid for my grad school. So, I've had a lot of fantastic education opportunities, and then qualifying for VA health benefits now. As I'm getting older, that's becoming much more important. And the VA is providing, they really do have some pretty good health services now for different veterans. One of the things that I did like about it also was I liked the travel in the military. So I traveled around to a lot of different countries. You get the ability to see things that you haven't, that I wouldn't normally get to see. If you're working, at a job here in the Midwest, you don't travel as much. But with the military, I've been all over. I really like Germany. I like Poland. I was over in Korea. I've been all over the Mideast, several countries there. But just meeting those other cultures, different foods and stuff like that is always, for me, it's always been really kind of a benefit to the travel and to the military. I also like the professionalism and the education. There's a lot of training in the military too that I really liked. A lot of leadership classes and things like that I've gone through. It's a little bit more of an active lifestyle, so physical fitness things, stuff like that you're taking part in. Well, long term, physically, so I was infantry and special forces. I did a lot of parachuting, so that hurts your knees, your back, stuff. You're carrying heavy weights. So the backpacks and stuff like that are pretty heavy, body armor, stuff like that nowadays. So that takes a toll on your physical body. So knees, ankle, back, that kind of stuff really kind of adds up. Overseas, with the deployments, the hypervigilance, and we'll talk a little bit about some of the PTSD stuff, but I've really struggled with a lot of sleep issues, things like that. Have a challenge to learn how to kind of cope and to adjust to it. It takes practice, but I've gotten that a little bit more stable now, where I get much better sleep. But it's taken a while to learn those skills. It kind of built up for me during the military service. So there were several incidents as I went through it, and so just losing different friends, stuff like that, and it got worse over time. I think was a tough part of it. For me, it was also, I went through a divorce coming back from my third deployment. And so when you spend, 4 years away from your family in a 7-year period, it's really hard to build that family structure. And so the divorce was really impactful to me, and that's really when a lot of the stuff started coming out in a bad way, and just kind of struggling with it. But for me, the PTSD, the anxiety, it feels like an anaconda around my chest. It just squeezes, so I call it the anxiety anaconda. But there's a tightness in the chest where it makes it kind of constantly kind of clenched up and not really able to relax. Breathing exercises and stuff like that helped me kind of temporarily relax. It felt like there's kind of a nonstop tightness to the chest. Not being able to sleep and is certainly another one. When you're overseas, you're kind of, you're worried about people attacking and stuff like that, so you just don't get very deep sleep. You're very busy working very long hours. My first deployment, I would say I was working 20 to 22 hours a day, and if you are getting sleep, it's kind of broken. It might be 20 or 30 minutes here or there. It's more like cat naps than really like sleep, but you're just incredibly busy over there. And then, stuff is interrupting your sleep, so there's constantly stuff going on that wakes you up. So over there, that's a good survival mechanism, kind of being a light sleeper. But then when you come back to stateside, it's not really a good skill set. You do need to get sleep. And what I found was, like, any movement, like if my wife moved next to me, like, then I'm wide awake in the middle of the night. And so I found it really hard to sleep next to anyone. I would startle awake really easy. I did several sleep studies, and they would also, on the sleep studies, they can tell that I'm not getting down into the REM sleep. Even if I'm in bed for several hours trying to sleep, I'm not actually getting any kind of quality sleep that really helps. And that had some pretty significant downsides to it. So if you're not sleeping at night, then during the day, I'm using a lot of caffeine or sugar to try to stay awake, which adds a lot of weight gain or other things that have negative impacts. There's a lot of kind of ripple effects from not being able to sleep very well. You're irritable. That increases a lot of your anger, makes poor decision making. I talked a little bit about like the relationship issues. Those got very tough when you don't want to be around somebody, or you're very irritable. They don't want to be around you, and you don't want to be around them, and that makes for the really tough on the family life. The other thing was like triggers, and this one happened this last week, but I had a really good friend that was from Texas A&M, and he was killed over in Fallujah. And about a week ago, I saw a guy wearing a Texas A&M hat, and so it just kind of pops you right back to thinking about some of your friends that you've lost or things like that. So the triggers with the PTSD, they come out of they kind of come out of nowhere. You can't really plan for every trigger, but what you can plan for is just how to, hey, if something does happen, I just take a breath in, or really kind of work through the different issues. So rather than focusing on what happened to my friend, you focus in on the good things that have happened or the good memories that you have of him. It's taken a little while, but I cope with loss much better now. Certain things like the Afghanistan war ending, to me was a pretty big trigger in kind of an interesting way. But I was deployed right when Afghanistan started, and I can remember from the towers people jumping to their death. Years later, when they finished the war, you see the planes taken off and people are falling to their death again. And that was a really weird and odd trigger because, I don't know, I just wasn't really ready for that. But the war started with people falling to their death. It's ending with people falling to their death. So those kinds of triggers, they come up. Certainly things like fireworks. So I can go down to Miller Park here and watch fireworks. So I'm fine with it. But the month before 4th of July and afterwards, people are shooting fireworks randomly at different times. And when I'm not expecting it, that's when it really kind of sets me off. That'll get my adrenaline flowing, hearing the loud noises, stuff like that. Sometimes cars backfiring can do that. So there's just different triggers, and you kind of learn to work through some of those things and try to reduce that anxiety. I don't know that it ever goes away completely, but it can definitely get a little bit more released, relaxed, and better, where you can actually cope with it and function. There is, and I've had a lot of therapy. Where I first made success was with sleep. And so seeing the doctors, talking to them, working through and doing several sleep studies to kind of learn how to sleep better, trying different medicines, different things like that. And then once the sleep got stabilized, and that took me, I'll be honest, I started working on that in 2012, and it didn't really kind of click for me until about 2020. So it almost took me 8 years to learn how to get decent sleep. So none of this is fast. And so, I do have some wisdom on how to do it, but it's not an easy journey. It's not a quick journey. It took me a long time to kind of figure out how to do that stuff the right way. But I started by working on myself. And so sleep was really a high priority. And then once I got that kind of figured out, then I started, ironically, started working on my diet, losing a little bit of weight, trying to exercise, get myself kind of centered and fixed. And along with that went the individual therapy. So trying to work on myself, my own issues, and then recently I've kind of transitioned to working a little bit more on like couples kind of things, so my relationship issues. But I couldn't really work on us until I worked on me. A lot of cognitive behavioral therapy. So you're talking about your actions and how, what happened to you, how'd you feel, what were your emotions, how do you respond to it. There's also exposure therapy where they talk to you about, the counselors will talk to you about what happened, and then they're trying to kind of re-put you in that same scenario where you talk about it until you're comfortable kind of talking about it. Exposure therapy it's not easy because you're kind of going through different triggers until it's a less painful for you, but it is one of the more common PTSD treatments that therapists will use. I also had the stellate ganglion block shot, which is it's a shot that they put in your neck, and it blocks the nerve, and it helps reduce the fight or flight response. It helps reduce down the anxiety. They've been using that technique for about 100 years, but it was normally used to kind of reduce pain. But what they found was that people were getting that shot also had reduced PTSD symptoms. And so now they're kind of using that as a PTSD treatment. So it's relatively new to PTSD, but it's a procedure that's been around for about 100 years. So the way you kind of think about it is it's kind of like an epidural where they block the nerve pain. SGB shot, it lasts for about 1 year to 5 years. So it's a little bit different for different veterans. So it doesn't numb, like I don't feel numb, but I just feel less anxiety. So I don't feel that tightness in my chest anymore. And so that helps me with therapy and stuff. So you still need all that other stuff, but the medicine gives you a little bit of a breathing room to work through and process some of that stuff without the anxiety. There's also EMDR, which is your eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. And so when you do that therapy, they hold like a finger or pen in front of your face, and they'll have you hold your head still and follow with your eyes, follow the finger. And so while they're going back and forth, then you're talking about a process, something that happened to you. Certainly things like service dogs, a lot of I don't have a service dog, but a lot of veterans find and non-veterans, a lot of people find service dogs to be very beneficial to PTSD. They can be kind of expensive. A good PTSD dog is probably $20,000 to $30,000 to train, but they do really amazing work. When you think about military stuff, the dogs, if you're having a nightmare, they'll go over and flip on the lights so they can help with sleep issues. If you think about some of the military guys, when they're like, if they're over in Fallujah and clearing rooms, things like that, going through houses, they may have anxiety even going into a brand new room. And so the dogs can go into a room and they'll let the person know that the room is safe to go into. And that can be important to people with like sexual trauma and other things too, like having a safe room or knowing that that's safe. So the dog can notify you that your house is safe or that the room is safe. And so that's actually very comforting to a lot of people. The other thing the dog does is if you have a lot of anxiety, as soon as he or she, the dog, notices you kind of bouncing around or your voice getting more agitated, they'll come over and sit right next to you. And they start by looking forward. They're facing the same direction you're facing. And if you just reach down and pet the dog, then it kind of turns the dog off of its process, right? That's the way to tell the dog everything's okay, is just pet it. But if you don't pet it, then the dog will move in front of you and it will face you. And so basically whatever you're looking at or whatever's causing that anxiety, the dog is kind of putting itself between you and that. And again, you can just reach down and pet it, and it will kind of turn the dog off that process. And then the third process to it is the dog, if you still don't respond to the dog, it can put its paws up on your chest. So again, it's very hard at that point in time to ignore the dog, whatever anxiety is causing. I've not actually seen the dog go through like the full motion of stuff like that. I have seen it occasionally come up and sit next to people, but once the dog is sitting next to you and nudges you, it's almost an instinct for people to reach down and pet the dog. And then the service dogs also take the pressure off of the person. So let's say if I had a dog here and you walked up to me, it's a conversation starter. So you'll talk about the dog versus talking about the veteran or talking about the person. And so for people that have a hard time connecting with other people, the dog is actually a really good conversation starter, and it takes the focus off of that person and puts it onto the dog. And so a lot of people come up, hey, can I pet your dog? Or, where was the dog trained at? Or how long have you had the dog? It's safe conversations to the person that's got the service dog. So those are very helpful PTSD treatments. My experience has been it takes a combination, right? And so if you think that one thing is gonna hey, I'll just do cognitive behavioral therapy and I'll be fixed. My experience is that's not really it. I had to do sleep issues. I had to figure out working out. I had to figure out eating better. I had to figure out individual therapy. I had to figure out group therapy. I had to figure out couples counseling. I had to figure out more things than there's a whole lot of things in there. And then I didn't mention it, but I had to figure out finances and stuff too. So things that aren't related to PTSD but do cause a lot of stress and pressure. Certainly financial problems or things like that cause a lot of people anxiety. And so just trying to stabilize a lot of things in my life and figure out, what works in so many areas. So the treatment, I would say you're going to have to look at a lot of different things to make it really effective. There's no one magic treatment that fixes everything. So with healthy recovery, we've talked some of the physical things or individual things, but a lot of people when they're dealing with PTSD or other issues, they isolate. That doesn't help. It actually makes things a lot worse. They start to spiral downwards, and the more they isolate, the more likely they are to turn to substances, and eventually they look at suicide or other things like that too. So they can really, really go downhill and struggle. A healthy way to recover, at least for me and a lot of other people, is just reconnecting with family and friends, and for the military that includes your military family. And so we talked about that when we first started was, you leave your family and then you join a military family. You're kind of connecting with those other people. So I think what a lot of veterans do when they're trying to connect with their PTSD is they start by connecting with other veterans. And they find that easier to talk to the other veterans than they do necessarily their family members. And I certainly find that to be very true, that it's easier to talk to other people from the military than it is to sometimes talk to my spouse or other people. So just connecting with veterans groups, and they have a lot of support out there for different veterans. And when you look at recovery, I'm talking about veterans, but it applies to anybody really. There's so many different groups and things like that, not just veteran groups, but anybody that's kind of dealing with PTSD or trauma. There's a lot of support groups out there. I talked a little bit, I went through that divorce. When I went through the divorce, I went through a divorce care at one of the local churches and spent it was about 12 weeks long, once a week. But again, that's just a group where you're connecting with other people kind of going through similar type of trauma. There's grief classes, so if you lose somebody and you want to process through that stuff. So local churches, local medical facilities, local county, state, federal programs are out there too. A lot of nonprofits, and so just connecting however it works for you. We have an art therapy group that's open to veterans, and so I find that one very helpful for me. I do a combat PTSD support group that I find very helpful, and then I volunteer at a lot of different things, so teaching a kids martial arts class, working on nonprofit boards, things like that. So keeping active for me really works and helps me connect. We talked a little bit about connecting with friends and family. So what I found is after I connected with the groups, then I'm starting now to work more on trying to reconnect with my family, immediate family and extended family, and kind of work on rebuilding some of that stuff that I've kind of let go over the years. Many, multiple deployments, you're overseas, stuff like that, you're in the military traveling around the world, and you haven't really worked on connections with your parents as much or things like that. So just reconnecting with other family is good. And then I liked, not necessarily liked it, but trauma is multisensory. And so whatever your trauma is, as you're experiencing it, you're hearing it, smelling it, seeing it, multisensory. And so what I found healthy is recovery things that are multisensory. So things like cooking, gardening, artwork, music, anything where you're kind of engaging multiple senses is a really powerful, helpful tool. And if you're doing those things and talking about your trauma at the same time, it's that anxiety you have with your trauma, you're processing or doing something while you're kind of talking about it. It helps, just the physical act of doing something helps reduce that anxiety, and you're able to talk through that stuff. So the art therapy is really good. You know, you don't have to be good at artwork. We mostly do a lot of abstract artwork and stuff like that versus trying to do something very precise. But you can sit there and fidget with like modeling clay or things like that, and have a little bit of fun with it. And then those groups also tend to have humor in it, and so it doesn't really matter which groups that you sign up for. A lot of groups, they have you do a check-in when you first start and check out when you finish. And so when you check in, some people may be feeling anxiety or different issues, but by the time they leave, there's usually a little bit of humor or connection in that group that helps brings people's feelings and emotions up. And so those are always really good. So when you're pairing that with an activity like cooking, gardening, or things like that, it really makes things powerful. The other thing that I've noticed was, it's simple, but like vitamin D. So during the summer, just getting out and getting sunlight and fresh air makes you feel better. During the winter, a lot of people kind of struggle with that, but I have like one of those happy lights that helps. I take a vitamin D pill, and I've noticed that has kind of significantly helped during the winter months, just having just the right vitamins or doing the right stuff to help kind of bring your mood up a little bit. These are all like vitamin D, that's over-the-counter stuff, but I got that from taking labs with the doctors, and they're saying, hey, you're low on your vitamin D is low and stuff like that. So part of the treatment, I'd say go to a doctor and do the labs, do the hard work, the sleep studies, the things like that, and then listen to what the doctors are saying, listen to what the professionals are saying, and work on that. But you can have fun with it too. And so as you go through the trauma piece of it, doing stuff, connecting with the groups can be fun. It's a good way to get out there, and having fun helps bring that happiness back into your life. It helps reduce that anxiety. And so that's really the big counter to that PTSD. Your trauma stuff is bringing that happiness back into your life. Really good. So I've had a noticeable change from about 2020 to now. In the last 2 years, a significant growth personally, just on how I feel internally. I spent so many years not really knowing what to do that it feels good to finally feel like I've made traction. But like I said, I spent 8 years where I wasn't really sleeping very well, and that was very, very tough for me. Once I got one thing figured out, then several things kind of clicked in a row. So that's very good. So I do feel much better. I've processed through a lot of stuff in an interesting way or a better way. I had mentioned my friend that was killed in Fallujah, and I found out, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 months ago that they had written a book. Somebody else had written a book, but he was mentioned in there, and they talked about what happened to him. And so just reading through the book and kind of learning a little bit more about what happened to my friend while he was in Iraq, that helped just kind of process through it and stuff. And it was a tough read at times, but I felt so many years have gone by now that I felt like I was able to do that and process through it. And so that's kind of nice. Well, I've shared this before with other people. Like I can stay busy or I can get in trouble, and I kind of default to getting in trouble. So I stay busy. And so, like I said, Monday nights I try to do that art therapy class. Tuesday I teach the martial arts to the kids. And I find the kids have so much humor. They really help reset me. We were talking the other day, about their safe place. And so, because we're talking martial arts, so in your mind, make up your own little dojo. And what does your safe dojo look like? So they're practicing meditating. These are younger kids. One of the kids, who's probably about 6, says, well, my dojo's made out of lava. And so that really struck me as kind of funny, right? So lava is not necessarily what an adult would consider a safe thing, but the kids, their creativity and stuff like that helps bring that up. And I really do like teaching kids just because of that humor aspect or how they look at things. And with my kind of perfectionist attitude on those things. Like when I think of a dojo, I think of like a perfect building, right? And kids have this free-flowing ability to really create things in their head. I do those PTSD groups every other Wednesday. I do a smart recovery on Thursdays. And then I do a bridges meeting about every other Thursday night. And so just different ways to connect. And then I'm constantly connecting with my job with veterans. Some of them are really struggling and others are doing amazingly well. But even the veterans that do really well, they have tough life problems. They've just got healthy solutions to it. And so I like connecting with the veterans. I like talking to them and meeting them and kind of learning a little bit about their lives and what they're doing to stay healthy and connect with people. Veterans Court, where I work for, is one of the problem-solving courts. So it's like drug court or recovery court, which is for mental health. Veterans Court is just for veterans, and they get their services through the VA. So drug court and recovery court would get their services through the local community. So Carl, Chestnut, other therapy here in the community. What we do for Veterans Treatment Court is they go out to like Danville for rehab, stuff like that. So every veteran that we pull into Veterans Treatment Court frees up space here in the community for somebody else to get access to like a therapist or a rehab or different things like that. So VA is really good with that kind of stuff. So we've got a clinic here in Bloomington. There's a center in Peoria. They've got the hospital out in Danville. They've got a hospital up in Hines VA up in Chicago. So there's a lot of VA facilities here in the state that we can send veterans to for a wide variety of different issues. And they do a lot of the stuff, a lot of the services they provide now are actually virtual. So you can talk to a therapist. They'll send them out an iPad. They just talk to them. They don't have to necessarily drive out to Danville. They just do their appointments on like an iPad or a tablet. It's pretty convenient, and it's a great way to reach some of these rural veterans that don't have access to services. So I did several programs in the last year or so through the VA. So one of the weight loss classes I took was through there. Some of the PTSD things I've talked about have been through the VA, through those services. So our Veterans Treatment Court, when they get in trouble with that stuff, we, instead of sending veterans to jail, we look at getting them treatment so they actually get healthier. And then by the end of the treatment, we're trying to get them into where they've got jobs or they're going back for education or they've got housing. We want them stabilized in the community so that they're not back to perfect, but they're back to healthy enough to be in the community without having police interactions and stuff like that. And so all that stuff is very, it's very similar to what drug court and stuff like that is doing. Same kind of process where we're trying to get people improving their lives. So them working on their own lives, getting the treatment to get better. Thank you for the time, and I really do appreciate a chance to talk about the PTSD. I do hope that this helps out other people. I'm very open to talking to people about some of these things that I've gone through or talking about how to process through some of that stuff. So sometimes there's a little bit of a stigma about getting help for some of this stuff, but I would say that it's very worth going through the processes. Not easy processes, but it's definitely rewarding once you get into the processes. You see the benefits, and it does make a difference in your life, and you start feeling better. That makes it 100% worth it to go through that stuff. So thank you for having me, and I'm glad to share some of my experiences, and I hope it helps somebody else out.